let's get started. Out of respect of everyone's time, I see folks are still coming on in, and come on in, join us, do some welcoming comments, and then run through a series of really great speakers. I want to, on behalf of my co-host, Congressman Scott Peters, just welcome you all to this virtual town hall meeting. My name is Assemblymember Todd Gloria. I'm one of the co-hosts of this important event. And I think it goes without saying that we know that nonprofits are doing nothing short of heroic work during this pandemic. As the state and the country have virtually shut down, nonprofits and the people that work in them have really stepped up. And I certainly have seen that in any number of the settings that I've been in, at food distributions, at educational centers. I mean, the nonprofit sector is doing incredible things. So I want to just start this whole thing off by just saying very simply thank you to the nonprofit workers and organizations that are helping us get through this difficult time. We see you, we know what you're doing, and we are so grateful for what you're doing to help us right now. This town hall is really for all of you. It's intended to help you help our communities by providing relevant state and federal information to San Diego area nonprofits, to share some of the advocacy work that is being done by myself, my colleagues here in Sacramento, I'm sure by Congressman Peters and his colleagues back in the federal Capitol. Get some of your feedback, which is always really valuable. And I'd welcome to hear whatever you can share, as well as to answer some questions you may have, which I'm sure there are many. It seems like information changes on a, if not daily, almost hourly basis in some cases. So this is hopefully a good opportunity to put a lot of information on the table, collect some feedback, and get some questions answered. I want to thank the team at Cal Nonprofits for partnering with us on this event. Today, we're fortunate to have Jan Masaoka, Jan Masaoka, the CEO of Cal Nonprofits, as well as Lucy Salcedo Carter, who is the Public Policy Director of Cal Nonprofits. They're here with us in this virtual meeting, and we'll be hearing from them shortly. At this time, I'd like to kick it over to our co-host of this event, our great congressman who is happily in San Diego, Congressman Scott Peters. Scott, take it away.
Hey, Todd, thanks so much, and thanks for inviting me to join you tonight. Boy, we have been working hard on helping a lot of people around San Diego through the federal government, and I'm looking forward to talking about that tonight. We've heard particularly from a lot of nonprofits that they have a lot of the same issues that every other employer has. So we want to make sure that we're being responsive. We've passed 3 pretty big bills. We started with $8 billion. We thought that was big, and last one we passed was close to $2.5 trillion. So, you know, we feel like we've made a lot of resources available, but we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more about how we make sure we're targeting to the people that need them. And to the extent we have any work left undone, we want to hear about that also. I'll tell you what some of the topics are still today in the course of the conversation. And again, thanks to everyone for joining us, and look forward to the evening.
Excellent. Jan, can we toss it over to you?
Yeah, thanks. Hi. Oh, thanks again for co-hosting this. And I wanted to just say all of the nonprofits, you know, we have more than 200 people registered for this webinar, for this live event, I guess I should say. And I just really want to thank you, especially Assemblymember Gloria, because you were not only a founding member of the Assembly Select Committee on the Nonprofit Sector, but you also signed one of the letters that has been circulating, supporting the kinds of things that we really need state government to do. So it means a lot that you're with us today. I just wanted to say welcome again to everybody, and to just give you a couple of housekeeping things. So everybody here has been muted because we have so many people, but you can type your questions into the Q&A box, and you can see that at the bottom. There's a little thing, it's kind of right around the Assemblyman's shirt collar. It says Q&A box. So click on that. We do have pages and pages here of questions that were submitted in advance. So we will be asking some of those, but please feel free to do that. And so I think that's it. Oh, and these slides will be sent to you. This recording will be sent to you in the next day or two, so that if you know somebody that wasn't able to participate, they can watch it again. So thanks very much. And now I think I'm sending it back to you, right, to talk about state. What are you doing, and what is the state doing around helping nonprofits right now?
Jan, I'd love to do that. On my script, I have an introduction of some of the other partners who are joining us.
You're right. I apologize. You're right. Thank you. That's my job, actually, and I forgot. Thank you. So I want to say, yeah, it's really great today. We also have someone from philanthropy. We have Mark Stewart, who's the president and CEO of the San Diego Foundation. Hi, Mike, wave so they can see who you are. And then we also have two nonprofits from San Diego, and that's really great because they'll be telling us kind of what it really feels like from where they are. One of them is Greg Anglea, the CEO of Interfaith Community Services, a housing and other human services organization in Escondido, and Lisa Cuestas, the CEO of Casa Familiar. Hi there, and she is in San Isidro. And then on our staff, Lucy Salcido-Carter is a member. She's our policy director, and she'll be filling in a little bit around the edges of what you guys are talking about policy. So let's go.
Let's do it. Jan, thanks for introducing them. You really have an all-star lineup of San Diego nonprofits. I know you get to work with folks all across California, but from Mark to Lisa to Greg, I'm a fan of their organizations, and they're doing some really important work really every day of the year, but I know that work is even more important now as we deal with COVID-19.
I just have to ask you, what are you in front of you? Is that USD that I'm seeing? You in a
virtual no. That shows you're not in San Diego. That's the California Tower behind. What's that this side? And that's a virtual backdrop, everybody. I'm broadcasting you live from the fabulous Sheraton in Sacramento. You don't need to see my luggage behind me. So I thought as the arts and culture heart of San Diego, so many wonderful nonprofits operating. I thought Balboa Park was a great backdrop for this particular live cast. I know it's close and near and dear to Congressman Peters' heart too. He's done a lot of good work in the park over the years. Jan, what I'd like to do is just give a quick update on the state, and then we'll have a dialogue with you before we toss it back over to Congressman Peters. But at the state level, I want the folks who've dialed in to know I just returned to Sacramento a couple of hours ago. We have reconvened for the first time in nearly 2 months here in the Capitol to continue to respond to the COVID-19. To date, the state, unlike the federal level, you heard Congressman Peters talk a moment ago of passing 3 or 3.5, depending on how you look at it, federal relief bills. California's really passed one and then a multitude of executive orders. Our piece of legislation was done back in mid-March. It's a $1.1 billion relief package, which we know is going to be insufficient to meet the response. Our projection is that we're going to spend roughly $7 billion on this response by June 30th of this year. And so we're back here in Sacramento to try and fashion and budget for that sort of response. And that's why opportunities like this is really valuable. I'm proud to say that the first bill was passed on a unanimous bipartisan vote of the legislature, really signaling, I think, the consensus we have on making sure that we were doing what was necessary to ramp up the public health response, as well as make smart investments in different places. And Greg would know this better than a lot of folks. A good chunk of that money is for our unsheltered population, a part of how you've seen the convention center in San Diego convert to a temporary homeless shelter. This is a part of what we've been doing to try and funnel resources to the local level. But that said, I know many of you are struggling under the weight of more demand than ever, while at the same time really seeing your revenues dry up, whether it's through contributions and fundraising to other grant resources as local governments and whatnot start to tighten their belt. So we recognize that nonprofits are enormous employers. I know you deal with all the same challenges that for-profit and small businesses we've heard a lot about in recent weeks as we deal with this pandemic. I think it's important for you to hear from someone like me that we know that. We know you have a payroll to make. We know you're running an organization and that you need relief as well. And that's a part of the letter that Jan was talking about a moment ago. So Jan, why don't you take a moment to talk about what Cal Nonprofits is doing? And if we could chat a little bit more about what the response is at the state level.
I'm having a lot of background noise for some reason. Okay, now it's gone away. Well, thanks so much for that introduction to these issues. And, it actually means a lot that we are able to now talk to elected people directly. And it says a lot for you and the congressman that you're here to make yourselves available to nonprofits, not just to tell people what you're doing, but also to hear what's going on for them. The thing that really amazes me is that never has it been so clear the importance of the nonprofit community, right? We're on the front lines, we're on the newspapers, we're on the news every single minute, whether it's a hospital, or healthcare clinic, services for people with disabilities, childcare centers taking care of the children whose parents have to go to work, and on and on and on. And from an advocacy point of view, because we're a state policy alliance, the hard part is being on the front lines on one hand, and on the other hand, in the back of the line when it comes to some things in Sacramento and federal. This one issue that you touched on, which is that, you know, we need to get the same kinds of benefits as for-profit employers, as for-profit property owners, as for-profit commercial renters. Because, I mean, for example, in California, 1 in every 14 California jobs is actually at a nonprofit. So we're an important part of the workforce, an important part of the employment picture. And so all the things that you guys are doing to help employers, it's just been so important to make sure that that nonprofits are included in that group of employers, which I have to say in the 2008 recession was not the case. There were a number of employer-based supports that were not made available to nonprofits. And another thing I think that, you know, is very important from, so about 1/3 of the nonprofit community's funding comes from government, whether it's federal, state, or local. So we know nonprofits rely on government funding, many of them, but on the other hand, what's also not known is government relies on nonprofits. So for example, you know, 32% of Medi-Cal services are delivered by nonprofits. So we are really a huge part of what I sometimes call the services supply chain, right? There's an food supply chain that includes agriculture and wholesalers and truckers, and we're really an important component of the services supply chain. And government, of course, is doing what it can these days to protect its supply chains. And one of the most important things for us, in fact, in the survey that we did of our 10,000 members, 86% said that their work was being damaged by their inability to modify their contracts with state, local, and county governments. And for just as an example, what that means is that you could be a health clinic and you're probably not doing as many TB tests as you used to do, but now you're doing a lot more COVID tests, but your contract is written for TB tests. So you need to get a modification so that you can bill for COVID tests instead. And this is just happening everywhere where people need these pretty simple flexibilities that won't cost the state or government a single penny because they're already in the contracts. So this has really been a large part of the focus for us, is flexibility in contracting and also equal treatment with for-profit companies when it comes to those things. So those are probably the most important things that we're working on. And but we also have a lot of questions, and I wanted to ask you about one in particular. So there, you know, on one hand, I mean, we're kind of in a sort of a dichotomy in some ways in the sector, because on one hand, we have people that are overloaded, health clinics, childcare centers, testing centers, mental health. And on the other hand, we have people like theaters and museums that are shut down and not thinking they may be able to open for a year. So we have these two very dramatic kind of ends of the spectrum on that. And we also have really large nonprofits and we have really small ones. And I'm just wondering if you can say something about, you know, what you're thinking about protecting the small and mid-sized organizations as well, but also, you know, looking at sort of the inequities that we've had for so long and what kinds of things are being done to in particular help, you know, nonprofits that are in communities of color, nonprofits that are in rural areas, nonprofits that are in poorer areas. So sorry, that's a lot of questions wrapped into one, but I know you can answer it.
Yeah, no worries. Let me try. I mean, right now, as I mentioned, you know, we've already appropriated $1 billion. We expect it to cost at least 6 more. And I think what we're doing, and the nonprofits was wise to put Scott and I together on this, because I think we're watching closely what's happening at the federal level with the anticipation of doing something at the state level as they work on relief and stimulus efforts, that we try and figure out where the gaps may be and try and fill that in with our own resources. And you know, what we've talked about generally, maybe as an example of how that would fit, those sort of puzzle pieces coming together, the CARES Act, which many of the folks who are watching this are familiar, provides relief for cities with populations of 500,000 or more. That leaves out a whole lot of cities in this country from being assisted through CARES Act funds. Some of that money will come to the state, and that will ultimately filter down to those small cities. But that would be a good example of something at the federal level where there was decisive action was taken to provide a tremendous amount of resources to cities, states, and organizations, but there's still that gap. You know, if you're Del Mar, which is in my assembly district and adjacent to Congressman Peters, you know, it's a town of 4,000 people. They're not going to receive assistance, but they're heavily dependent on tourism, and so there's a gap there. what I mean to say in that is that we identified that gap. We're having that conversation. I was in a conversation about this just earlier today. I think with regard to nonprofits, as you said in that letter that we wrote, that I signed on to with 29 of my colleagues, both Republicans, Democrats, and independents, saying that we want to treat nonprofits the same as for-profit entities, that we want maximum flexibility injected into the regulatory environment to make sure that folks just kind of keep the doors open, the payroll is being made, help get through this. So that on the back end of this thing, we actually have the infrastructure. I like your supply chain analogy. This is critical social infrastructure that has to be there if we're going to defeat the pandemic. Most of what was in that letter is non-monetary in nature. And so part of getting back here was to say, let's hammer out those areas where we see gaps. Let's take the modest resources that we have as a state and put them into those gap areas. And that's why this conversation is probably pretty helpful. I know some of the people who are on this webinar, this live cast, have qualified for the federal PPP program, right? And that may be hopefully enough to get through. I don't know if that's the case, but maybe that's enough to kind of bridge through this. But there may be some who are not qualified or who can't get it. And we know there's some challenges with that. And lastly, Jan, I want to say, to your point about inequities, I think we know that we're not in the equal society we'd like it to be. There are disparities all over the place. There was a housing and homelessness crisis before this pandemic. There is still one right now as we speak, and Lord knows there'll be a terrible one on the back end of this. We have to put a lot of this stuff through filters. I think Congressman Peters and I both got some data the other day about where unemployment in our community is happening in San Diego. That obviously over 4 million Californians have now applied for that. But when you look in San Diego region, in the northern part of my assembly district, you're talking about 10+% of unemployment. That's tragic. That's horrible. That's families' lives that are impacted. But there are neighborhoods in the southern part of my district that are north of 25 and 30% unemployment, some knocking on the 40% level. That gets the inequity that you're talking about. And I hope that as we consider what we do at the state level, as well as hopefully what they do at the federal level, this consideration of inequity would be a part of that conversation. I'm sorry, I went on longer than I cared to. Can I ask you one question, Jen? And we can toss it to Congressman Peters for his portion of the program. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
When you're hearing from all of your members are nonprofits all across California, what are the type of assistance you're hearing that they want? And is there any difference between what those members in San Diego are saying as compared to other parts of the state?
Well, as I said, there's such a big difference between people that are in emergency and essential services. I mean, just, and on the other end, people in the performing arts. And I think the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, has helped an enormous amount of nonprofits. I think that is making a huge difference. We do know that some larger organizations aren't eligible for that, so that continues to be a worry. In the last recession, well, first of all, in every disaster, we always see an upsurge in giving. And in every recession, we see a great decrease in giving. So we're very worried right now about what that might look like after sort of this first peak of the disaster aspect of giving. And I think, so many organizations, theaters can't hold performances, people can't hold foster care homes can't hold dinners to raise money. So I think that long-term outlook is very, extremely concerning. And I'm not sure what else to say, but people are really trying, just like small businesses are, trying to hold on to as much as they can and trying to figure out what they can do. And I know a question that's going to come up later, is the question of the California state budget. And what is that going to look like? You're going to see nonprofits and communities in so much need, just at the same time that state revenue just plummets. So you can either talk to that now or maybe later, kind of what makes sense to you.
On this conversation, because as you and I have already talked about part of the Federal CARES Act, he obviously is a part of helping make that happen. So Scott, can we kick it over to you for an update from the federal level and to Lucy as well for parts that she may want to kick in relative to SBA?
Sure. And again, thanks for having me. So the federal government's faced with two crises. One is the healthcare crisis. And part of, we can talk about later if you want to, but part of getting back to going to the theater and everything else is how we handle that. And I, for one, just for the people who are in the arts, see a full restoration of the arts lifestyle and so forth to be our goal. I don't want to settle for not being able to go to see plays and performances. I just don't think that's where we want to head. So I'll put that on the table. But let's talk a little bit about the economic response, which has been quite staggeringly large. We started with the first bill we did, which was basically $8 billion, which was a tremendous amount of money just 6 months ago in our thinking. But $8 billion just to help the federal agencies deal with this kind of issue. Followed by the Families First Act. It had two focuses. One was to make sure that if you needed to be tested, you would get tested without regard to your ability to pay. So if you had a copay, you'd get a test. If you didn't have insurance, you get a test. There was an understanding, this was bipartisan, that everyone should have a test who needed one. Also to provide leave for employees, 2 weeks, that would be for everyone, and then an additional 10 weeks if you had to stay home because your child's school was canceled or because you yourself weren't feeling well. And that was to be reimbursed to your employer. Again, that was a fairly substantial undertaking, but also I think relevant to this conversation, we provided funding for nutrition assistance, CalFresh, school lunches, Meals on Wheels, and food banks. Very important parts, I think, as Jan noted before. The delivery of services happens a lot through nonprofits. The economic response for individuals in the CARES Act, three parts of it: economic response for individuals and for businesses through loans and through grants. Individuals, as you know, they receive, if you made less than $75,000 in 2018 or 2019, you probably got a payment already by now of $1,200, additional $500 per child. That's helpful. Probably needs to be more. That payment, by the way, gets graduated down as you get up to 100,000, but over 100,000, no direct payments. If you have a student loan that's backed by the federal government, you get not to pay that for a while. If you're a renter with a federally backed housing, you can't be evicted. Fortunately, Todd and his colleagues in the state have prevented any evictions. So that's a much broader protection in California than people have in other states. So we're grateful to them for looking out for renters and for people having to pay their utilities and so forth. California's really led the way. Again, more money for nutrition programs, homeless assistance, and things like that. For businesses, I think there's 2 loan programs for businesses. SBA loan program, which is more in the nature of an emergency loan with a $10,000 up front, and the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program, which was very popular. In fact, as you know, it ran out of money almost right away. Unfortunately, the more savvy businesses were the ones who were in line first. If you already had a law firm or a bank who knew how to go through this, you probably were first in the race. So when we went back a week or 2 ago to supplement that program with more money, we insisted on setting aside a certain amount of money for $60 billion, in fact, for people who bank through community banks or credit unions or people who didn't have pre-existing banking relationships. And we see that money is getting out to those folks now. Now, nonprofits qualified for these programs, and the theory that, if you're an employee working for a nonprofit, you still got to pay your family's bills. So it didn't really matter to your employee whether it was a nonprofit or not. But so that was 501c3s, which most of the arts and the organizations we're talking about here are, and 19s. I didn't know there was 501c19s, but those are a category of veterans organizations that got some preference as well. I think the sort of outstanding discussions we're having are, one is, I'm sure we'll have to put more money into some of these. Oh, let me say one more thing I forgot. Unemployment insurance. So we put a ton of money into states' unemployment insurance funds. Now, I heard from the Secretary of Labor in California that they had more unemployment claims in 4 weeks this past month than they did in all of 2019. So we've had to give California a chance to ramp up the administration of these things. And I think they've been doing a great job, frankly. And I know Todd's probably gets a lot of calls from people who are upset about it. But just imagine the quantity of this. Not only is the quantity large, but we've expanded eligibility so that folks who didn't qualify before, like the person who used to cut my hair, obviously she's not working, she could qualify as well. So that was a big boost for people. And that's $600 a week for folks. And so I think that will be an important part of this program. So what's next? We're talking about whether each or any of these need more money. We've probably allocated more to the healthcare system than we've actually been able to inject in. The PPP money is, it looks like it may run out again, so we may have to recharge that. But state and local support will be a big thing because states, as much as California refers to itself as a nation state, that's what I've heard lately, they don't print their own money. They've got to balance their budget like every other state. And so I think that we have to recognize as a federal government that they provide a lot of the services that are frontline services, like firefighters, like police, like EMTs. They provide services that we've come to understand are very important, like teachers. And we want to get teachers back to work. We want to make sure that they're not laid off. So support for states is really important. And also they're huge employers. So if you really want to keep people employed, you can't really ignore state and local governments. I think that's a coming discussion in the federal government. Second, my caucus has asked for, the New Dems have asked for automatic triggers. And the idea of automatic triggers would be that if these economic conditions persist or even, God forbid, worsen, money would automatically be injected by a formula that looked at things like unemployment rate or amount of loan applications without having to take another vote of Congress. And that would give certainty to the economy, but also would take politics out of it as we go down the line, as we get closer and closer to November. I think we're all conscious that some issues can be, even a pandemic can be political. Automatic triggers would keep us out of that. Finally, I guess the other thing that someone mentioned too is I'm on a letter that I drafted to the chairwoman Velasquez of the Small Business Committee and the chairs of Appropriations, Financial Services, and Ways and Means to lift the 500 employee cap for nonprofits. So for C3s, we've heard the same thing someone else mentioned, that 500 is a pretty constrained number for some folks. If you have just 600, 700 people, that could be a real game changer. You're never going to get the attention from the Treasury Department that United Airlines is going to get. So we want to see if we can help people who are in that no man's land, and that'll be the topic of our next conversation. Not this week. It looks like sometime next week we may head out to DC to take votes. And so I'd love to hear in the interim, if you have other suggestions, if you think we're on the right track, if you think if we're missing something, or if there's anything you want to reinforce.
Awesome, Scott. Lucy, did you have anything you want to pop in here before I turn it over to Mark?
Sure, I think I will jump in. Yes, I wanted to focus a little bit on the PPP, which has been a great boon for the nonprofits who have been able to apply so far. That first round was pretty difficult for nonprofits. Right. It was difficult for them to find a lender that they could work with. And so I'm really happy to hear that there's some designated funding in the interim spending bill, particularly for smaller lenders, because I think that opens up more options for nonprofits. So that's really great. And for nonprofits directly, if you haven't applied, please do. And if you don't know of a lender to work with right now, there is a lenders list on the SBA website. So, so far, I think the second round of funding, there's still some money. I went on the SBA website today and looked, and I didn't see that it's run out. So that's a really good sign. I wanted to make a couple of comments about the EIDL program too, the Economic Injury Disaster. It's really great that there's some additional funding for that program, but I was on the website today and noticed that There's going to be a focus just on agricultural businesses right now for the EIDL. So it would be great if that reopens for nonprofits going forward. And then I loved hearing, Congressman, that you have signed on to that letter, which would expand programs like the PPP for larger nonprofits. I think that that's something that we've been hearing a lot about from the larger nonprofits in California. And then we've also heard that expanding the 501c categories beyond the 3 and 19 would also be beneficial.
Can I just say, we were on a phone call today about that. That seems like it's a little bit tougher right now. I think people are trying to prioritize the things we talked about. So I would say that if you're a nonprofit arts organization or social service organization, those are probably more likely to get help right now.
Okay, great. And then the only other thing I would add goes back to some of the state conversations that we were having, which is that a lot of nonprofits are still struggling to get PPE, especially for those who are providing essential services. As part of the survey that Jan mentioned, we heard 62% of the nonprofits that responded to the survey are still really struggling to get PPE. So I wanted to just get that on, in particular, the state's agenda, because I think emergency funding at the state level, it would really be useful for it to include PPE for nonprofits. So great, those are my comments.
Thank you, Lucy.
Yeah, you bet. That's
great. So I'd want to, if we can, thank you, Scott. We'll be back to you in a moment, but want to bring in one of our heavy hitters, all-stars that have joined us this afternoon, or I guess early evening now. Mark Stewart from the San Diego Foundation. Mark, you all have been doing some pretty exceptional work in the San Diego community, assisting all kinds of folks. Could you maybe just sort of start with what the foundation's been doing during the pandemic, and maybe give some more details about the grant programs that you're currently running and raising funds for?
Thanks, Todd. All of us at the San Diego Foundation are grateful for the leadership that you and Scott Peters have provided at the state and federal levels, respectively. And I'm grateful for the personal financial contributions that the two of you have made to the San Diego COVID-19 Community Response Fund. Our regional fund launched on March 16th with $1.3 million in commitments and has grown to almost $11 million to date from 2,600 donors. The biggest source of that funding has come from individuals who hold donor advised funds at the San Diego Foundation and have made transfers into the Community Response Fund. With a $1.5 million challenge gift from the Hervey family funded our foundation and another 7-figure corporate gift to be announced soon, we are headed to $15 million and beyond. We have no goal for fundraising. Our goal is simply to do as much good as we possibly can. So to that point, we've made more than $7 million in grants and have several more millions in the queue. We began this effort by making trust-based grants to some well-known nonprofits in this region, like Feeding San Diego, the Food Bank, and of course, Interfaith Community Services. Soon thereafter, we launched an application process for nonprofits to seek COVID-19 grants to address needs such as food security, essential living expenses, and other emergent needs, such as learning devices for low-income students, medical supplies, and childcare for first responders and healthcare workers. To date, we've received more than 430 applications, totaling $33 million in requests. The need throughout our county is just simply enormous. We also established the fund's Leadership Council to bring diverse voices and community leaders into grant decision-making process. And we have leaders from business, organized labor, higher education, private foundations, and county leadership all involved. Our talented community impact team evaluates each initial application, and we've placed particular emphasis on supporting nonprofits that reach cultural and ethnic populations that may not seek assistance from more mainstream sources. Our grants have covered every corner of the county. We're also moving swiftly. We are set up to move grants from application to wire transfer in 2 to 3 weeks' time. The foundation asks very little in the way of grant reporting so that nonprofits can remain focused on serving our neighbors and fellow residents in need. To date, of the 118 grants that have been approved, almost 70% are fully deployed. As well, the foundation is absorbing all the costs for administering this work so that 100% of all the contributions go to direct service. Our website, sdfoundation.org/COVID-19, has all the information that nonprofits interested in seeking a grant might want to know. All of the fully executed grants are cited there too. Also, we're working with the County of San Diego and Supervisor Nathan Fletcher to launch the San Diego County COVID-19 Small Business and Nonprofit Loan Program. Thanks to leadership by Supervisors Diane Jacob and Jim Desmond, the county has committed $5 million in no-interest loans for small business and nonprofits in the unincorporated areas of our region. And with the leadership of the Foundation's Board of Governors, we've added another $5 million for nonprofit loans. We're finalizing the details of the program and have great partners like Acion, LISC San Diego, Mission Driven Finance, California Southern, and the Small Business Development Corporation working with us. We're actively recruiting more capital to come to the program and hope to take applications soon. And we are taking interest inquiries now at the same website. Please know there is no need to rush to apply. We will not be making loans on a first come, first served basis that has been a challenge for so many applicants in other loan programs. I'll just close by sharing one of my favorite wisdoms from Maya Angelou that is so relevant for today. Maya once said, "Fear and hope cannot occupy the same space at the same time. Invite one in to stay." For all of us working on the San Diego COVID-19 Community Response Fund, we are fully committed to help nonprofits provide the bright light of hope that pushes the darkness of fear out the door for our neighbors and friends who are hurting through this crisis. Thanks.
Mark, that was an awesome update. I think I can speak for Scott. We're both nuts and bolts kind of guys, and you just action-packed and information full of that thing. Scott, did you have something?
I would say that, you know, that's it's such a hopeful message for so many people who are having such a hard time. I mean, it's easy. We try not to get too separated from what people are going through, but it's a scary time for a lot of people. And I think the Maya Angelou characterization is a good reminder. You know, it's hard on everybody. So it's good work that you're doing, and happy to do our little part to support it and encourage others to do the same. I guess I wanted to ask Greg, tell us a little bit about your world and what you're seeing on the ground. I think I had one office meeting with you, and I think we saw each other at the homeless count last time. So what are you seeing now?
Yeah, thanks, Congressman. So Interfaith Community Services is a pretty broad safety net organization. We do everything from basic needs food assistance to shelter, rental assistance, employment support, mental health support. And I don't think it's a surprise to anyone who's on this call. It's an amazing group of attendees, by the way, on this call. So great job getting the word out. That at Interfaith, and we're based out of North County, San Diego, we're seeing a quadrupling of demands for basic needs assistance. We've obviously changed all of our services. So, you know, where somebody used to come inside and meet face-to-face in an office, we're now actually meeting them at their car in the parking lot. And then connecting a lot of people to deeper dive support. The foundation granted us, the San Diego Foundation early on, thank you, Mark and company, $100,000, which we're already deploying to people for rental assistance needs. We had a family that called the foundation after hearing about it, and then they referred her over to us. I think her situation is telling. She's a mother of 3. She works at a local restaurant chain. That restaurant's closed. And one of her 3 kids is special needs with cerebral palsy. And part of the way she makes ends meet on a monthly basis is through SSI income that she gets through her child. That income is determined on mom's paycheck. Mom's paycheck is lower, but her SSI payment is still also low because of that. It takes a couple months to catch up. So she was looking at being behind, and we helped her get caught up in rent through the foundation's support. A lot of people are not, though, reaching out as quickly because they know that there is a moratorium on evictions. But the moratorium is not a moratorium. It's literally kicking that can down the road. So unless we find a way through interventions to do a rent holiday, or we see a dramatic escalation of donor resources available to allow nonprofits like ours to help meet these needs. You know, we helped her with $993. But if she comes to us in July with no situation changing other than the fact that she's been out of work longer, that $993 is going to need to turn into $4,000, and we just don't have the systems for that. So unless we figure out a way as a nation and as a state to overcome these challenges, the workers of our community are just going to get absolutely hammered, and we're going to pay the price forever. The biggest contributing factor to tell you if you're going to become homeless is the zip code you live in. There's a direct through line between poverty and homelessness, and we'll see, as Assemblymember said earlier on the call, homelessness absolutely explode if we don't get ahead of this. And so hopefully we'll identify some other interventions. I could go on, but I will stop at that. Thank you, Congressman, for the opportunity to share, and for everyone who's doing such great work in our communities.
Thank you, Greg. I mean, it's always been the case that some people are close to homelessness, and it's just one event that could push them over. And now we've got a global pandemic. It's going to affect a lot of people. And so I hear what you're saying. And a moratorium on evictions is not a moratorium on rent. That's a different issue. And I think it's one that a lot of us are interested in working on as well. So I know Todd is too. Maybe Lisa, Casa Familiar, you also have a different perspective. Why don't you share a little bit with us about what you're seeing and what you think the needs are?
Great. Thank you, Congressman. I definitely wanted to share a lot of what has been shared within my team members who have been doing such a great job. So thank you to them. But low-income communities like San Isidro right now is experiencing a major digital divide. And I think now we're feeling how important technology and access to technology and internet is. And we have that digital divide with a added language barrier in communities like San Isidro. So even for families who do qualify for unemployment or other benefits, navigating and monitoring those benefits online is very difficult sometimes. And so worse yet, you know, we have case managers where, yes, they helped families apply for that unemployment benefit a month ago, and they're still not seeing it, right? I know it will get out, but they're not seeing it yet in a lot of cases. And so, like you said, that May's, you know, month's rent is up, and we're having to also break down that, you know, those rents will be due. They're not forgiven, and a lot of families not understanding what those rights are and connected to the moratoriums, and understanding that formal letters have to be provided. And so we're helping with things like that. But I think we still assume too much right now that everyone has a phone, or that everyone has the kind of phone or the kind of computer that will allow them and have that data plans, right? That is the key to making sure you can access online services. And so for somebody like myself, if I was trying to access low cost internet right now, because it's so important, what we're seeing is that one of the first questions that they ask is a social security number. And so for communities that are, you know, that have mixed status or immigrant communities where they're in process, that right there will add some challenges. And so there's a lot of kids that are not in our school district that are not getting computers, maybe the middle schoolers and the high schoolers, but not the little ones. And we have families where there's 2-3 kids in the household, and having to do worksheets and mail them to the schools. And so you can imagine what kind of a mess that's going to turn into on both sides. And so a team member sent me a note today, and it's a quote that I'm going to share to kind of give a picture of what it feels like on the ground right now. She says, a good part of my day is coaching people how to open their email, create an email if you don't have one, explaining how the application process works and how the follow-up works with their application. So basic computer literacy tied with the benefits application is a lot to cover in 1 hour. And so we have tripled the amount of individuals that are providing this direct social services over the phone just to keep up with the demand right now. And so Casa is having to do old school with new school type of approaches to be able to keep that connection. And so what we've started doing is we went back to printing newsletters, and we're putting them in laundry facilities. We're putting them in whatever to-go restaurant or banks and different places, or we're mailing actually to our older residents that we already have their contact information, because our seniors are extremely isolated, especially if they don't have technology. And a lot of these benefit programs are low-income internet is for families with kids, and our seniors are being left behind. And so I think you can imagine all along the border, and San Isidro is a perfect example of, we have families that are afraid to ask for help. And you hear the rhetoric right now. And so any kind of help right now, they just feel like they're being targeted. And so you have, and we're in a place where two economies depend on each other. And the long-term repercussions of that are still yet to be seen. And where maybe one government isn't taking this as seriously, and I think Mexico is slow to taking it seriously, as to, wearing the face coverings and limiting big groups. And so we're going to have to figure out and support our nonprofit clinics. I think our nonprofit clinics are so important right now, especially in immigrant communities, because it's where people feel safer to access their health services. And we don't want them crossing the border on a very regular basis, just to go get, a quick checkup. And so, but a lot of families are used to doing that in border communities. And so it's really a lot of things going on. And if I could just, it's 5 things that we're really concerned about as a border community, as a community that with extremely low income, is how serious our digital divide is. It's unemployment benefits that are slow or just not possible for a lot of families. It's 3 is the importance of Census 2020 right now is being lost, especially for communities and low-income communities, because they're already having health disparities and education disparities. And we need your help from the elected officials to help us really put that message out there that we must take time to do that, to secure future resources. This is an example of why. And and addressing that fear, and how do we as nonprofits address those things right now and get ready for a potential future wave in the fall or next year, and start planning and getting some coaching ourselves, right, on how do we plan our next budget. I'm not looking forward to having to go through the next budget meeting with my board members, because that's going to be tricky. And so, what's the good? We have to stay positive. We were part of the group that got the first round of the payroll protection program. So yay. That's why we're going strong and providing so many services right now. But, and the San Diego Foundation came in right away and was very supportive to Casa Familiar, to be able to bridge the digital divide, to make sure we were able to work remotely, to make sure that, people that we provide affordable housing to are getting relief as well. And, and our community is right now learning how to do Zumba on Zoom, right? We have our promotoras. And so that's like a really fun thing where I'm seeing 60-some-year-olds and 70-some-year-olds and 20-some-year-olds getting together via technology. And that's why it's so important. And thank you to those who are advocating for nonprofits, because we really are a lifeline. And we really bring unity together. And that's needed in recovery. And so I want to thank all of you.
Thank you, Lisa. Jan, I know you have some questions. I think we have maybe about 10 minutes for some questions and a wrap up. I know a couple of questions have been taken care of in the Q&A section, but can I lean on Anya to throw those questions out?
All right, we're going to do speed questions, okay? Because there's so many. Well, I think just to build off a couple of really important things that Lisa just mentioned. I mean, one is, we know that there are over 2 million households in California that don't have broadband access at home, and this whole issue of the digital divide. And, what kinds of things, can government be doing to solve this issue for those kinds of people, but also to support like technology supports to nonprofits that are doing technology-based work that they haven't done before?
Maybe I just start out by saying that Congress has been talking about doing an infrastructure bill as a way to jumpstart the economy. Timing probably is pretty good for that. And I would say that the one thing we've come to agree on is that the #1 job is to provide broadband. We used to talk about rural broadband, but now we see the limitations of technology in urban areas as well. And so I think building that backbone is people have learned to recognize that that's as important as any road or bridge or port, is getting that information technology conduit out to people as well. So I think I'm hopeful that we can do something like that pretty soon.
Thanks. Here's a question from Jacqueline Silverman at the San Diego Art Institute. And she says, is this a realistic goal to open a cultural art institute in Balboa Park in July? Is that a realistic goal for them or for other organizations?
Well, I'm a fan of Jacqueline's institute, and
Yeah.
It's not one of the larger ones. It's a very impactful and important one, but physically it's not one of the largest ones. And I think that she may be able to figure out a way to do some reasonable social distancing in that venue. Jacqueline, and for all of the folks that are on this call, video conference, whatever you call this, whatever the verb is, Governor announced today that we're moving California to our stage 2 of our reopening process, which will allow for more retail opportunities, manufacturing, even some level of education. And there's a sort of a stage 2 part B that could include sit down restaurants. And so that's going to start on this Friday. Important caveat, local communities can choose to maintain their current status if they want to, but this will authorize them to start loosening up. So that'll be, the early May. Stage 3 is measured to be in weeks after that, which again, an institution of the size of Jacqueline's could potentially be in that setting. Larger ones, the performing arts folks, the concert venues and large halls, live music and dance, that's probably still a ways off. That's in stage 4 under California's reopening plan.
Thanks. Also a couple of questions we have related to cross-border funding, both not just funding, but collaboration and just kind of working on both the economic and the healthcare aspects of that.
I'll just say, let me just start with that because I think the border is important to all of us. I just got off the phone call with the hospital CEOs. Their big concern now is the acceleration of COVID cases in Tijuana. And as you know, the border's closed to non-essential travel, but so many people, I was at tens of thousands of people cross every day who are either legal permanent residents or citizens of the United States who live in Mexico to do jobs here. So I've been in conversation with the CDC this week. I said, you know what's happening at the border? And they don't see that yet as our problem. But one thing we know about this virus is that it's international, like so many other things are. It doesn't really respect the borders. So we are trying to give some attention to investing in Tijuana to help them flatten their curve so that to protect our own citizens. So we're paying attention to that. But I think the other thing is someone mentioned, I think it was Lisa, it's in all of our interests to make sure that everyone who lives among us is healthy. And no one should be fearful that something will be used to deport them. And that is a particularly difficult thing to get across in today's Washington, D.C. Californians understand it. Everyone from Texas to California across the border understands that. But that's something that we have to redouble our efforts on right now.
I was wondering if anybody else wanted to talk on that issue. Lisa, maybe some specifics about what you're seeing, or, Mark, what the San Diego Foundation is doing about border and binational issues.
Well, it's definitely something that really fueled why we made sure to do so many outgoing calls right now. In a month, we received over 1,000 calls, and we also had over 1,000 outgoing calls just to screen for services and get a pulse on how is everybody doing and encouraging them to apply for the benefits that they can. And I think that it's a time where even when we're encouraging to participate in the census, they say, oh, no, that's just another way to get my information. And those kinds of things existed anyways. And so when you have the kind of environment where it just you watch the news and it sounds and it looks like immigrants are blamed for everything under the sun right now, it presents a challenge. And I think it's something that all decision makers and people and organizations that have that trust within communities, we have to make sure we make that part of our messaging as to everybody has value in our communities, and that for San Diego, that is such an immigrant community and that is so much richer because of it, from arts and culture to our service industry and just the fabric of our community. We really need to make sure that they understand that they are part of our community, and there is ways to access help. It's limited, but with these organizations and these elected officials, I think it's the kind of groups and people that are committed to making sure every person is valued.
Mm-hmm. And Lisa, what you said is very important. Don't discount non-politicians. I know it's a shock that not everyone has the highest trust in politicians, elected officials, but we do our part, I think, in all seriousness. But the way communities work, sometimes it's family to family, and I think people on the ground are much closer to that. The census is very important, and it's on us right now. We've got an extension of the timelines, but everyone needs to work family to family, person to person on that. And I think Lisa, you and people like you are in a good position to do that. So we thank you for your help.
Absolutely. Here's a really great question from Joe Burley at Say San Diego. For the nonprofit community and for society as a whole, are there any potential silver linings?
What I'd like to answer to that, Jan, is one of the great silver linings for the San Diego Foundation is we have had hundreds of conversations with nonprofits that we haven't been fully engaged with before. And so we are learning more about the community and learning more about some incredible small nonprofits that reach very deeply into some specific cultural and ethnic populations that we weren't in conversation with before. And so now these have received grants. They're very much on our radar screen. And I think as we move forward as an organization, these will now become trusted nonprofits with whom we hope to do much more work in the future.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Any other silver linings, all you people with rose-colored glasses on, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, it's laying bare the injustices of our society, which a lot of us know, and it's no surprise. But to a lot of people, it's surprising that the people who make our world work are paid the least, and that's stupid, and we should change that. Mm-hmm. And my hope is that we learn something that leads to change as a result.
Well, if I can just add my own comments on this, I also hope that it's also raised the profile of workers like you're mentioning, but also nonprofits. And it's never been clear how much nonprofits are important to communities in all aspects of every part of our lives. And it's also, so much of how much money comes to California is based on the census. So I'm also hoping that people recognizing the importance of government work will also realize the importance of being sure that they're counted in the census. And also I have to say, we're very lucky to have people like the Assemblymen and Congressmen fighting for us. And the importance of making sure that we all vote, everybody who's eligible registers to vote and actually vote, so that we continue to have people in office that are going to look out for California communities and for nonprofits in particular. So that's a pretty faint silver lining, but it's the one that I'm kind of hoping right now. All right, so Assemblyman Gloria, can we turn it over to you to wrap it up with some inspiring thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know how to be inspirational on Zoom, but let me just thank you, Jan, and Cal Nonprofits for what you do. It is important work in California. I want to thank our partners, certainly Congressman Scott Peters, who is our voice in Washington, D.C. And Scott, we thank you for your leadership and for sharing your insights, as well as Greg, Lisa, and Mark for the great work they're doing. I just want to wrap up and just let you know, if we didn't get to your question or if we can be of any additional assistance, please call my San Diego office. We're working harder than ever to try and be responsive to all the concerns that are out there. We can't solve every problem, but we're giving it our best shot. And I just ask you all to stay in close communication. Let's find those gaps. Let's try and fill them in where possible. And please lean on Cal Nonprofits. They're a great voice for you up here in the Capitol. Lean on Congressman Peters and I down in San Diego. Do what we can on the local level. And please avail yourself of every opportunity. We will get through this. And I know that we'll do it because we have a strong, vibrant nonprofit infrastructure in the San Diego region. So to everyone out there, again, we see you, we know what you're doing, and we're so grateful for what you're doing. Please keep it up, and please let us know if we can be helpful at all.
Todd, if I just might add,
Yeah.
that I want to thank you for the leadership it took to put this together and getting such a great group together. Of course, for federal issues, I also want to invite people to look on my website for information. We've taken put a lot of effort into getting information there about what resources might be available to you. And also, of course, if the answers aren't there, you can always call our office as well. But Todd, thank you so much for what you do. California really sets a standard that I think many people in the country are jealous of, and you're a big part of that. So we appreciate all you do, and hope you stay safe in your meetings.
You too. All right, everybody, I have to hop off to do one of these for small businesses right now. But again, be in touch. And Cal Nonprofit, thank you so much for hosting us. And everyone, be safe, be well.
All right, bye everybody.